I could never go back to atheism. It's not an option. It's not it's just the whole idea that the world is just material. It seems to me now completely absurd, just from my point of view now. You couldn't reason me into that any more than you could reason me to be 2 feet taller, right? It's so... Go for it.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Honest J interview and podcast. Today, I have a very good friend of mine. I have an exciting guest here that I'm going to be chatting and sharing with. And he's going to be actually sharing about more of his testimony and his story to us, which I have found to be very unique and very special and very precious. And he's my friend, Dylan Gous. He is a creator of the YouTube channel Existential Delight. And this YouTube channel, has started off as... when in his former atheist days, when he shared his knowledge of readings on philosophy, religion, arts, and etc. And now it has fully shifted as a Christian channel that stands as the opposite of what we call existential crisis. And I really like that description. I think I'm going to be asking him a little bit more about that soon. But we go back a long way. I was part of a ministry crew, a cultural ministry crew, dance crew, and that's when I got to meet Dylan through our ministries. And I remember some of the exchanges that me and him had over Facebook chat, and and it was after we were separated for a little while, I found out that he had become an atheist, no longer a believer in God. And I remember chatting with him and trying to explain about the gospel with him and etc. And then some time passed. I like, how long was that? When did we actually first meet? I don't even remember. Was it like 10 years ago, something like that?
It might have been. I mean, I think still in high school or just coming out of high school when the ministry stuff really started kicking off.
Freedom Feed, yeah.
And then, man, I actually can't give you a date off the top of my head. It's been a while, man. It's been close to 8-9 years, I would say.
8-9 years.
Just as a rough guess.
Yeah, I'm guessing around 7-8 years. And it was in 2020 when I reconnected with him again to find out that he had his personal encounter with Christ and he was a total follower of Christ, and he started to share me his stories. But I'm talking too much here, and I want to say welcome, Dylan. We're very excited to have you here.
Thanks, Jazzy. It's good to be here.
Yeah,
it's really nice to chat with you. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you go by a different name these days. But...
Man, I haven't heard that name in ages, really. Wow. And it's actually, it's surprising to actually think that there are some people who actually still think of me with that name.
Jazzy, yeah. I mean, you're still Jazzy on my phone. Actually.
Really? That's really funny.
Yeah.
Man. But I why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? I think I have shared pretty much, but you just go ahead and share who you are, and also why don't you introduce to us what your channel, the Existential Delight, is?
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, like you said, my name's Dylan, and I've been on YouTube for a little while now, since 2015. And originally when I started, I think it's true for pretty much every YouTuber, but I didn't anticipate that the channel would grow the way that it eventually did end up growing. But originally I felt this need that I wanted to just create things, and YouTube seemed like a good medium, a good place to put things that I'd made. So I saved up a little bit, I got myself a camera, and I made a few vlogs, which are now all private because they're terrible. But I needed to make that sort of very rough content in order to get to the type of content that I was sort of more proud of. But also myself a little bit. Yeah, I was raised sort of Christian, but it was a very, I'd say very superficial, my understandings of the faith are very superficial. Now, that's not to say that my parents didn't have a good understanding, but the way I'd received it, the way I understood it, I would say now in retrospect was very superficial. And in high school, I was really into Christianity and I was sharing it with people. And, you go to these sort of these church camps and you have these experiences, these very emotional experiences, and you come back and you're sort of like, you're ready to live for Christ. And that's also when I got into ministry and when I met yourself. And I was playing guitar in the band for Freedom Feet, and you were one of the dancers. And those were good times, like looking back. And then after that, I sort of got into college and I was studying music. And that was the first time that I really encountered people who were not only I'd obviously met non-Christians before that, but this is the first time I was like really sitting every day face to face with people who were very antagonistic towards Christianity, towards religion. So people who were very like, would directly tell me that, Christianity is a fairy tale. And so the natural response for me to answer their questions was to start searching and start looking for answers. And so that's when I sort of slowly weaved myself into apologetics. And I started watching a lot of these debates, these Christian debates versus atheist debates. I started reading books like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. I read Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great. I watched a lot of just constantly like consuming this content regarding
the conversations between the Christian apologetics and then the atheists.
Exactly. Stuff that I'd never considered. And the thing is, like, my understanding of Christianity was so superficial. It's kind of like a building with a faulty foundation. Someone comes along and they just start taking a sledgehammer to the foundation. If it's not firm, it's going to collapse. And so that's what happened to me. Is I got to the point where I couldn't explain why I believed the things I did, at least not in the way that would have satisfied me at the time intellectually. It felt like if I told you, yes, I believe, it really felt like I would be lying to myself. And this is a pretty common thing with, I'd say with atheism is, at least for me, when I told people, like, I remember I would often say, God knows, if God is real and he knows me completely and he knows my heart, then he knows and understands why I've come to the conclusion that I've come to, right? He knows why I would have reached this conclusion. And so it really felt genuinely, honestly, like I'd come to a place where I just can't reconcile what I'm supposed to believe with what I am believing. And in retrospect, I think sometimes we can think of it as a very logical, very argument-based thing, conversion. Like, if I give this guy the right logical reasons, if I give this guy the correct arguments, he will see logically that Christianity is true or God exists, and therefore he will become a Christian. But back at the time, and I didn't see it at the time, there's a very, very real moral component, a very, very real emotional component, which led to me leaving Christianity. Again, I didn't see it at the time, but there were certain things that I was doing in my life, behaviors that I had, the way I viewed people, the way I viewed situations. And it's almost like you want to do things one way, but then Christianity, it's not only these logical arguments coming in, it's also God sort of begins to seem like a dictator and sort of like wagging his finger at you, telling you, you have to do things this way. And then you've got all these moral inclinations that are sort of seem like God is telling you no the whole time. And then on top of that, you're getting all these logical reasons as to why, all these arguments, which are very old, coming in about why God might not exist. And so all of those things sort of meld together to the point where you kind of one day go, I remember I was like sort of walking in the garden. It's weird. A lot of things happen to me when I'm walking in the garden, but I was walking in the garden one day and I kind of had this thought for the first time. I was like, what if there is no God? And it just sort of stuck there. And so it's not just like conversion to Christianity, I don't think is a silver bullet moment. I do think people have moments of intense revelation. I do think that happens. Yeah. But I think for the most part, I don't know, it doesn't seem to me that's the majority of people. I think a lot of people sort of, it's a gradual experience. So like there's this hint here, there's this indication here, there's this experience here, there's, I'm reading these. And so just in the same way that you sort of come to the point where you go, my goodness, this is really true from the Christian standpoint. I think it's similar in the opposite way, sort of with atheism, where I had all these logical arguments coming in. I had these emotions that were in conflict with the teachings. And I kind of get to the point where I was like, man, I don't know if I believe this anymore. So that's there's so much more I could say about it, but that's like a rough indication of how I kind of started getting into atheism.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's really interesting because like you would I think in this time where, especially in the West, where the logic is king, where everything needs to be explained, when evangelism takes place in a form of explaining as well, you would point somebody struggling with faith or so to, apologetic resources, materials, and you were the first person that was like, yeah, I got into apologetics, and then I turned out atheist. So it was when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's quite interesting. But yeah, and that's kind of like the perhaps when people kind of think of it on a more shallow level, perhaps they do kind of tend to think that logic is pretty much what you need in order for you to kind of like present these arguments and then get them there. But you are saying that it wasn't just that, right? There was. Well, now with your self-discovery about what you were going through back in that time and what you actually wanted and your emotion and stuff, that it takes more than just explanations or apologetical materials, or so to speak, right?
Exactly. I mean, God, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with making the claim that you're a believer, or that you're Christian, or that you believe in God. And atheism, it's not that you don't have responsibility. It's not that you don't have, you're not accountable for your actions, but you can't be responsible for something that you don't think is there. So there's this apparent relief, this like relief that comes from, finally, like I don't have to feel this terrible guilt every time I do this, or every time I do that. So it's like a lot of people, let's say someone's addicted to pornography and they're trying to be a Christian, and every time they fail, it's like there's this, if they're really sincere about trying to live a holy life, there's this weight of guilt that comes with every sin. And I've often thought there's sort of two ways of dealing with guilt, because I think guilt just happens, man. I think everybody experiences guilt to degrees, and you can either say, well, actually, the thing that's telling me I should feel guilty, that thing isn't really there. So I don't have to feel guilty.
Yeah, it's like what do you call it? Like neurological response and just chemicals.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I don't really have to feel guilty. But the problem that I eventually came to was that I can't reason myself out of guilt. But anyway, so there's like this relief that comes with, at least for me, there was like this, almost like this God-sized boulder on my shoulder that finally came off. But again, it was a superficial understanding of God. Now God at the time was the big no. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. Now God is the big yes. It's yes to life. It's yes to freedom. It's yes to everything. So it's like a shift in the more you, I would say, understand the character of God, the character of truth, because truth is a person. The more you understand the love of God, the more you realize that love is actually ultimately very freeing. But the understanding I had of it was the complete opposite. It seemed like a cage when really it's the key to open the cage. So if you want, I can go on a little bit from how I got from atheism to
And that is the super cool part, I think when I first was catching up with you, I just sat there and I'm like, man, this is so amazing. Like, God, I was so thankful. The audience can resonate with this as well. We hear a lot of the stories where people are leaving the faith, and people who were even, that even seemed respectable, that even seemed like a really good Christian guy, right? And then after some time, by some shocking revelation or whatever, like you find the person no longer a believer and kind of moving away. And so, and you were like one of the case with that as well, along with other people that I know that have moved away from faith. And hearing your story, your testimony of coming back onto the stage and where you are now is just like I was so thankful to have that, refreshing water of, I don't know how I express myself now.
It's a good metaphor.
Yeah. It was just like a cool water running down, just to refresh everything. So yeah,
living water.
Exactly. Please do share of your story and what happened. Yeah.
Sure. So pretty early on in St. Augustine's Confessions, he says something. I'm going to paraphrase him, but he says that, Lord, you made us for yourself. So when we're not with you, Lord, you made my heart for you, and so my heart remains restless until it finds its rest in you. So it's this idea, this like Christian anthropology, that we're made for God, and so we're always yearning for the transcendent. We're always yearning for something higher. And you mentioned Jordan Peterson. He points out that even if you go to sort of a punk rock concert. I mean, what is a concert? We're all gathered together in this big place to sing and dance and cheer and be jolly about these sounds, about music. And it's like even there in sort of a punk rock nihilist environment, you have all these people coming and honoring the music. And there's rules to the mosh pit. There's rules to how we chant. There's there's all these almost religious systems. And so I, in myself, after atheism, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm looking back and I realized I had this intense yearning for the transcendent, because for me, man, it's just, I had a lot of problems, like philosophical issues with especially the moral problem. It's like, if we are just chemicals, and if we are just if my ultimately what you're seeing right now from me, my expressions, my interactions with you, if it's all just the result of chemical processes in my brain, if it's reducible down to only that, then morality itself is reducible down to only chemicals. And so there's nothing objectively good or bad, nothing exactly objectively good or evil. And I always struggled with that. Like, where do I ground my morals? Do I ground it in an ever-changing chemical, smorgasbord of just a mess? Or is it perhaps grounded in something more transcendent? So I always had these problems with atheism. I was never at rest. I was always restless. So I had this yearning, and so naturally you start looking. But I couldn't look at Christianity for the reasons that I described. So I started looking at Buddhism and Hinduism, and obviously it's intimidating just to pick up a book on the topic. So you look for people who are talking about the topic, and that's when I discovered Allan Watts. Okay. And that was like the doorway into the whole New Age world for me, because Watts, whatever someone might say about him, however much someone might criticize him, he was an incredibly good speaker. He could take complicated ideas and really, really present them and speak in a very easy to understand way. He had a good voice. He had this lovely accent.
Sorry, who is Allan Watts? Very briefly.
Allan Watts was a British philosopher who is mostly known for popularizing Zen Buddhism in America. So he wrote a lot of books. He wrote a book which had a big impact on me called The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And so he was one of the main figures in the New Age movement in America at the time. And later on, in his autobiography, originally he was sort of raised Christian. He was actually, I believe, a priest for a time. And then he actually eventually became a sort of, well, he didn't really become anything, but he had a much more pantheistic view that God is everything. God and the universe are one. And you deep down are actually God, right? Which is, I mean, it sounds, and then, he writes this book called The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And he describes it as this ultimate taboo. It's the one thing nobody ever talks about, the one thing nobody ever says, because the last guy who said it, they crucified him. So he sort of gives you he explains Christianity from that point of view. Like he sort of puts it in a box and you go, okay, cool. Now I understand where Christianity came from. Jesus realized who he really was, but that's true actually for all of us. And so, and then it's like, okay, that's me as well. And then what it does is it sort of provides you metaphysical comfort, because now it's like, oh, now I can have the transcendent. I can have the wonder of life. Without having to be a Christian, without having to have these moral pressures on me, because Christianity demands spiritual discipline. It's not interested in spiritual mediocrity, right? So then it's like, well, Allan Watts definitely did, and I still remain, I'll never say he did nothing for me. Like one thing he really helped me with is just seeing the wonder of life, the wonder of, just walking in the garden, just the absolute sheer incredible, the fact that the sky, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to somebody who's not familiar with the philosophy, but just the fact that the sky is blue and, the grass is green, these things we take so for granted, all these things, right? So there's so much I could say about Watts, right? I'm actually going to be talking to a guy about it sometime soon. But anyway, that's a very inadequate and very brief summary. But basically, he was a popularizer of this idea at base level that we are that the self is the ultimate self of the universe, which is an idea you find in Hinduism. There is Brahman, which is the ultimate self. And then you sort of have the individualized self, which is observing the ultimate self. And the goal of life is to realize this. Now, that Allan Watts opened the doorway into Terence McKenna and Manly P. Hall and all these other New Age thinkers. And they sort of confirm and lay atop of this. Except Terence McKenna introduces the element of psychedelics. Where he says that if you want to see things that no one has ever seen before and no one will ever see again, all you have to do is take 5 dried grams of psilocybin mushrooms alone in your own living room on a Saturday night, and your whole life will change. Now, when you're a guy who's hungry for metaphysical realities, you're looking for the transcendent, and then someone comes along and says, hey, you don't have to sweep the ashram for 20 years. You don't have to pray to this priest for 15 years. Just take this, and, what do you think when you look at the waterfall? What do you think? So it puts all the emphasis on you. It's your experience. It's your moment. So, and I'd gotten into cannabis at the time, and people would ask me, "Do you smoke?" And by the way, I should say it's legal in South Africa, so I wasn't breaking any laws. But it's legal to smoke it at home, but I don't anymore, so I'm not even worried. But basically, people would ask me, "Do you smoke?" And I wouldn't say yes or no. I'd always say more than I like to. More than I'd like to, because I had that guilt about it, right? And for good reason. But anyway, so I eventually got my hands on some mushrooms, and I decided to take McKenna's challenge. And this was when I was kind of, understanding what Watts was saying. I was kind of understanding there is something more than just life. So my atheism had kind of faded a little bit. I wasn't as intense, but I still had this bad attitude about religion and religious people, because basically you think that everybody except you is deluded. You think everybody except you is believing in fairy tales, and they're holding the world back. Come on, we need to move forward, people. You're still, you're with the ancients.
I can understand it.
Despite the fact that the ancients were, I think, in a lot of ways far smarter than we are. I think it's a modernist bias to think that ancient people were,
old
but
school,
anyway, old school, or just unintelligent, right? But anyway, I digress. Outdated, right? So then with this kind of half-hearted atheism and this kind of yearning for something more, I'm at home one day and I eat these mushrooms, and pretty much, and here I have to add a disclaimer, right? And I've noticed it with a lot of people who've been in the same situation as me. We're very hesitant to talk about this because we don't want people to think that they need to go and do this in order to have a similar experience. So I just need to add that. But what happened to me was my materialism, the fact that the world is just, matter and it's reducible down to chemical interactions, that completely, it wasn't even destroyed. It just fell away on mushrooms. I realized that there is far, far more to life than what we perceive. There's much more than what we think. And suddenly my whole life, a wonder completely entered my life. Like my whole life became imbued with this absolute, unbelievable sense of awe at the universe, at what exists, at the fact that we are even here at all, right? And life suddenly became interesting. And I started reading history, and I started reading again for the first time in years. And I started watching interviews. I suddenly got interested in economics. I suddenly got interested in politics, and everything became interesting. Wow. Chesterton has this great quote that the world will never be short of wonders. It will just be short of wonder. So there'll always be individuals who don't have wonder, but the world is full of wonders, right? And that doorway opened for me. And so then this is a tricky place, because a lot of people never get out of this. They never get out of this. They get into that, and it's like, wow, this is the answer. This is it. I know I figured it out. Like, this is the thing I've been looking for forever. And I found it. And, if only the whole world could have this experience.
Right. It's a new gospel.
Like, it's a new gospel, right? It's like a psychedelic gospel. And so, if you've never had psychedelics, I understand. Someone would hear that and go, "Oh, well, you were just hallucinating." And it's like, granted, right? Maybe I was, but I can tell you that the hallucination or not, the experiences after that in my life, losing weight, cutting off ties with people that were ruining my life, suddenly, leaving a relationship that was completely toxic because I'd never realized it was toxic. Quitting my job and going to Cambodia, it really does. Like whether it's if someone wants to argue if it's real or not, that's a whole other. The experience, that what it leaves on you, leads to real actions within your actual life, as in losing weight. So there is that, and so we won't get into. Because there's a very deep discussion still to be had amongst people like myself and other ex-psychedelic users who are now Christians about where do psychedelics fit in. Right, that discussion needs to be had, and I'm trying to have it with people as much as I can. But for now, just putting that aside.
Which I think is so good. It's so needed. I think it's such a precious thing. I say this to you every time whenever we have this conversation, but I'm really looking forward I'm really excited and happy that there are community of people that are moving in that direction, because I think we need a lot of explanation. We need a lot of I don't know if I could call it a psychedelic apologetic in some way, but please.
Well, I mean, I think psychedelics are. I think that there are people that have definitely found them to be helpful. I think that there are people who have found help through them. But, and I need to go onto this now. I was describing that sort of being stuck in that world, right? Because you feel like you finally found the answer. So I was then, after a few days, the realization is not as intense as it was initially. You still have the knowledge that never really fades, like of life being much more. Like I could never go back to atheism. It's not an option. It's not it's just the whole idea that the world is just material. It seems to me now completely absurd, just from my point of view now. It would be, you couldn't reason me into that any more than you could reason me to be 2 feet taller, right? But anyway, so then I start a few days later, it's like it starts fading, and so you want more,
right?
So you have the experience again. And granted, for me, I never got into anything hard. Like I never went into hard drugs or anything like that, thank God, by the grace of God. But cannabis, mushrooms, for the most part. And then you start wanting to talk to people that are interested in the same thing, and eventually you start going to festivals, psytrance festivals, where people are taking these things and having discussions, and there's so much to talk about, man, that I'm just trying to figure out where to pin the tail on the donkey. But I realized very quickly that I remember being at a festival, and these festivals sort of become like what Mass is to me now, what like a Catholic Mass is to me now. Mm-hmm. That's what the festival was back then. I know that sounds like sacrilege and heresy, but at the time in my life, that was the most sacred. It was the most sacred thing. Like, this is where we come. We're away from the world. We can be with people who think the same, and we're sitting here. And I would talk to people at these festivals all the time. I was talking to people about these experiences, and I realized, first of all, that not everyone has the experience I had when they take these things. A lot of people take them, and they do not have a transcendent experience, or if they do, they do not integrate it in the same way. It doesn't change their philosophy. It doesn't change the way they live their life. And in fact, some people take it and it leads them, they don't get healthier, they don't get better, they completely go down a different route where they're actually smoking more weed every day. They're taking more of these things constantly, and it becomes like this life almost gets weighed down by this. There's the ordinary world, and then there's the real stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And I want to be there. I don't want real life is just. And so I'd find myself walking through the shopping center out in public, and I'm just thinking about, like, man, I know something that nobody else knows. I have this sort of secret knowledge, which is sort of like a sort of Gnosticism, right? This sort of like, I know something that no one else knows, and it gives you this elevated feeling. And I've often joked that it's often said that psychedelics destroy your ego, but I think in some ways, looking back, my ego was never bigger than when I was on psychedelics.
Right.
So I'm taking these things, and I'm going through life, and I'm sort of feeling like there's got to be I found it now, but is that it? Like, I take the psychs, and then I'm in that high, and then I'm there, but then it fades because it's, it works through your body, and then it's out.
Right.
And it's like, and now I'm here again. It's like, is that, like, if there is a great, if there's some kind of an architect to this whole thing, and he made psychedelics, and he wants me to take them, why, why is it not just permanent, or why is it not just, why am I feeling this lingering, this longing?
Right.
Why do I need more, right? And it's, and so then I was at so I'm just going to be full disclosure here. I went to this sort of traditional Native American sweat lodge ceremony where you're going into the sweat, this small room where they burn rocks and you start sweating, and everybody's taking, everybody's on mushrooms and things like that. And I'm sitting in there, and then we come out of it, and I've had this, it felt really nice. And then the host gives me this gigantic mushroom, and just like every other time, I take it, and this time it was different. This time I had an experience that I'm still today trying to unpack, still today trying to understand. I've written about it a lot. I'm trying to flesh it out in my mind,
right?
Because it's very hard to describe. But I ate it, and then I went into this house where everybody went to go and sit down because it started raining. We're sitting in this room, and instead of going in like I normally did, I know that sounds strange, but instead of sort of having these experiences on the inside, I'm just looking in front of me, and all these people are sitting with me, and this is going to sound crazy, but the room sort of started to peel itself apart. And I have no other way to describe this to you, Jazzy, other than to describe it through poetic symbolism.
Right. Okay.
It looked as if and felt as if the kingdom of heaven was opening up before me. And I suddenly felt this deep, completely deep, direct sense of oh my God, I'm doing the wrong thing.
Wow.
And then this is going to sound even crazier. I had this realization, or I had this intense feeling that I need to read my Bible. I need to talk to, I need to talk to God.
Wow.
The Christian God is the God that Christianity describes, the God that the Bible is pointing people to.
Right.
I had this very vivid sense that I need to look into that, and look into that is like the most casual way of saying it. It was not optional. Like this is something it felt as if something had reached all the way into that experience and had grabbed me and pulled me out of it. And I was sitting there, and I remember sitting back in the chair, and the lady next to me was like, "What is it? What do you see?" And I was like, and I remember saying to her, if I describe it, I said, the more I describe it, the more I hide it. Something along those lines. Like I can't put it into words. I cannot tell you what I'm seeing. And then I mentioned God, and then her whole demeanor was like, "Oh no, I can't go. I can't follow you there. I don't think God is. That's all.
Wow.
You know." And for me, it was like the most. It suddenly became completely obvious.
Wow.
That there's a God, and this was before the experience with Christ, right? This is not even the experience with Christ himself. This was an experience.
This is not.
This is an experience of like, there is a God behind things.
Right.
That God is not the reality I'm experiencing, but actually the creator of the reality I'm experiencing.
Right.
So which is a shift, man. Because sorry, go for it.
So this is like a different event from what you have described to me last time that you were sharing me your story.
Yeah. Because so look. In retrospect, that was an encounter with Christ. If you think about it,
yeah,
that was actually. But at the time, it wasn't like Christ. This was more of a there is God, but obviously, I believe now that God I was experiencing, that was fundamentally the Word. Right?
Yeah.
The ultimate truth beneath all things. And the shift from I am God and everything is God.
Right.
That moment was when that shifted to I am a part of the creation of something that transcends creation itself. And so I was so convinced with finding God within myself, that I am God, that I kept tripping on myself. I was stuck in a circle, constantly in myself. And for the first time, God was beyond me. And that was the first time I could actually transcend myself. That was the first time I could actually get out of my own head.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And realize that there's something beyond me that I'm accountable to. And I didn't have any language to describe it at the time. I didn't know how to make sense of the situation. But it was for the first time where I thought, okay, I thought I'd figured everything out, but yet again, I'm not there. So I often tell people, maybe just to like slowly start wrapping this up, I often tell people that there's no silver bullet. There's no like one moment when I suddenly went, I'm a Christian. But this everything I described to you now, that whole experience, that was one domain which sort of points in one direction, points to God. Then there's another one, which is the apologetic logical domain, which is all the arguments for God. Right. And for me, what was really convincing, at least logically, was a few things. One is obviously pretty much everything Jordan Peterson said, although I do have disagreements here and there with certain points of view. I don't think he goes far enough. I think that, it's not that the symbol is not the ultimate reality. It's what the symbol points to. But I don't want to misrepresent. I mean, he's way smarter than I can even begin to, But that's another domain. And then obviously, Thomistic thought and Thomas Aquinas's writings about his 5 proofs for God. So there's that whole area. There's the experience I had, and then there's the emotional experiences, the getting on my knees and praying for the first time in years, and seeing the actual, in Christian language, the actual fruits emerging as a consequence of giving my life to that ultimate transcendent reality, which you could call the Father. And so there's a lot of different domains, and I've sort of just given you one right now. The other one would be the intellectual sort of, like there's a great Christian philosopher named Alvin Plattinger. I never know if I'm saying his surname right, Plattinger. And he basically shows how it's reasonable to be a Christian. Within the Christian worldview, it's not irrational to be a Christian. So there's that whole intellectual side of things, and then there's the historicity of the scriptures. There's the evidence for the resurrection. There's a great book called More Than a Carpenter, which is a great introduction to basic apologetics. There's that whole domain which supported that psychedelic experience, and then all those lead up to the point where I'm, breaking down in my room. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I'm getting on my knees for the first time in years, and I'm just, for once, admitting that maybe I'm not the center of the universe, that maybe my life is not about me, that maybe there's something greater, and actually admitting that, saying it, and speaking to that as if it's there for the first time, not as if it's just a story or a symbol or just an archetype or just something like that, but actually a very real, intimate, personal, direct being that actually cares about you, that wants the best for you, and giving your life to that thing. And then after that, seeing all the addictions fall away, seeing, driving to work in my car and just suddenly breaking down in tears at thinking about how much I've seen change in my life in the last week, seeing how my relationships are being fixed, seeing how I have no more bitterness towards other people, seeing that when I wake up in the morning, I'm excited about life, that I'm excited about the world, that I'm excited to be here, even if things are wrong. And the word I'm getting to is there's a hope. There's a hope that gets implanted deep inside of you when you really understand what Christ is trying to convey. And that hope is so incredible that it brought me to tears every day driving to work. That I don't have to be the man I've been, and I don't have to be the one to fix it. That I obviously have responsibility, right? People will caricature Christianity and say, well, you're just, you're not doing anything. You're just relying on God for everything. And in some sense, yes, I am. Relying, but I still have to play a part in that. But that hope, and just to end this off, I realized that I'd been a pagan for a long time. And I'd rejected God. I denied God. And I wasn't there for him, but he was always there for me. And every living Christian was once a dead pagan. And the last thing that every pagan did, that the neo-pagans did anyway, the last thing they all did was they got baptized, they got Christianed. And so I had finally come to the conclusion of what every other pagan, the original pagans did, which was I eventually went through paganism, through psychedelicism, through atheism, through agnosticism, through Hinduism, through Buddhism, through New Age, all the way to where everything was leading me. And that is that moment where I went, my life is not about me. That it's about Christ. And there's a lot more you could say, but that's like a very rushed, very
I'm sure, man.
Condensed version.
Wow. And you quit like all the you quit mushroom and you quit weed and all these past lifestyles, right?
Yeah. It wasn't instant. Like I'd give it up, and then a week would go by, and then I'd get, and then I might have again. Not mushrooms. Mushrooms, I that's so intense. I stopped. And then, but like weed was, it was like a process of sanctification, like a process of coming to God with prayer and asking again. And 1 week would go by, smoke, and then 2 weeks would go by, and then 3 weeks, and then a month, and then eventually, I'm reading a lot of literature, and you just get to this point where you're like, man, I'm gonna let it go, and you just eventually let go. And so I haven't gone back to that. I actually don't even support that anymore. I think that we could have a whole nother episode just on that topic alone.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have so much. The Lord has used all of the experiences and all the process that you have been through, and everything that you were explaining to me earlier now as well. And because this is something, some audience might be out there listening to this, feel uncomfortable about these sort of stories and these,
of course,
sort of testimonies, because especially with like more conservative side of people who,
of course,
have only had like a linear like aspect of looking at somebody's conversion or journey. What I am amazed at is that how the Lord stooped himself all the way down to where you are, even using mushroom, and that is probably going to be the most uncomfortable idea that some people might have about this.
I wrestle with it all the time, man. I'm always thinking about it, and I'm trying to figure out, But anyway, I don't want to interrupt. Sorry, but yeah, I mean, like that's I wrestle with that more than anyone, man. Like if somebody's like, oh yeah, but did you have to take that in order to have that experience?
Right.
It's like I don't think so. I think God would have come in some other way. But that is just the way it happened for me. And like I said, a lot of people take those things and they don't have that experience. If that was true, then we would the whole New Age community wouldn't even exist. They would all be Christians. So
right.
It's not that everybody has that experience.
Yeah,
it's not that if you take mushrooms, you have to take them to be a Christian. It's just that's the way it played out.
Yeah, absolutely no way they were trying to promote mushroom in any sense.
Oh, no, not at all.
But we are here just to reveal that, God is truly able to use all sorts of method in order for him to reach to us. And that is the incredible thing. Like he would go down that road. He would venture down that road, because eventually what happened is he pulled you out, and God. You know God, not just know about God. You know God, and it's an amazing grace. If you really think about it, there's no other explanation that there can be. I think other than that, it is His grace to use all of that. What devil meant for evil, he turns it into good. He took you back.
Exactly.
So
God is so great that he can extract good even from evil. He can use evil even to accomplish the good. And it's like I've spoken to guys who had the same experience but with LSD, who had the same experience with other drugs, right? Wow. So it's not about the psychedelic. It's just about the fact that and again, it wasn't like I became a Christian after the mushrooms. It was more that was the experience that made me go, there is something greater than myself, and just this world even. But I completely understand and even sympathize with people who would be very hesitant to even acknowledge if this is a true testimony. But I can happily today tell you that Jesus Christ is Lord, that all roads lead to Christ at the end of the day. And that he is the only way. He is the only way to heaven.
I just want to quickly just backtrack onto what you just said earlier about all roads leads to Christ. I think some people might be hearing that and immediately thinking like universalism or pluralism or stuff like that. You to clarify maybe what you meant by that.
Yeah. Well, I just meant like any time you're pursuing truth, you're actually pursuing Christ. You just might not know it, because Christ is truth. So if I'm looking for truth in Buddhist scriptures, any truth I find in them is just going to be a road leading me closer and closer to Christ. It's going to be like a stop on the road to the ultimate reality, which I would say is Christ. So I also did say that Christ is the only way to heaven. So I'm definitely not I don't know what the exact term for is, universalist or relativist or I tried all those other. I can very quickly give you just a quick story about one day I had to encounter someone close to me who was in really a rough place, and I was a Buddhist at the time, and that experience completely falsified and devalued everything I thought I knew about my worldview, because there was nothing I could say, nothing I could do to comfort this person. Christ ultimately can comfort you in your darkest moments because he himself has been there. If you were to line up all the religious leaders and you were to ask them, which one of you your birth was foreseen, in scriptures before you were born, which one of you, when you would come, the world would brutally torture you, murder you, the most heinous crime, the most terrible crime on the most innocent person. Christ is alone in that realm. He's the only one that you can come to with your suffering, because he has been there himself, and even worse. He's the only one. And so Christ... So, for example, if I say that all religions will take you to heaven, all the other religious leaders, you might be able to sort of squeeze it out of them that's maybe possibly true, but Christ himself would say no. No one who unless you know me, you do not know the Father.
Exactly.
So it's like I'm not. Now, of course, man, there's so many areas to touch on this, right? Of course, it doesn't mean we should be antagonistic to individuals who are practicing Buddhism or Hinduism. I think we should just lead them to Christ. You can show these people how, what you're looking for, what you're finding in these,
right.
It's to its full extent in Christ. This whole idea that all religions are basically the same. I mean, religions are, a lot of people think they're, I'm paraphrasing someone here, I can't remember who, but religions seem, superficially, they seem the same. But fundamentally, they're different. A lot of people think that religions are sort of superficially different, but fundamentally the same. But actually, they're fundamentally different, and they're superficially the same.
Yeah, I think Ravi Zacharias said that, I think.
Yes, Ravi Zacharias. And it's like, Christianity is not another tray on the buffet table of religions. The very idea of world religions, the very idea that we have religions themselves is a man-made concept, right? The original followers of Christianity, and you can go and check in the New Testament, didn't even call it Christianity. They called it the way. Christ didn't say, I have a method. He didn't say, I have a way. Or I have a truth. His identity was truth, because he's God. So right, I am the truth. It's like a completely radical, completely different, completely. And we sometimes, there's that verse where Christ says to his followers, "Who do they say I am?" And they say, well, they say you're this guy, they say you're that guy. And then he says to his disciples, well, who do you say I am?
Exactly.
And Christ asks all of us that question. He asks every single one of us, who do you say I am? Do you think I'm a symbol? Do you think I'm just an archetype? Do you think I'm do you think I'm one religious leader among another? Do you think I was just a hippie, a revolutionary? And the disciples answer, well, you're the Messiah. You're the one. You're the only begotten Son of God, and it's only through your blood that our sins can be forgiven. So I think I did speak a little bit poorly when I said all roads lead to Christ, but what I basically meant by that is that anytime you're pursuing truth, real truth, you're actually getting closer, I believe, to, if you are getting closer to the truth, you are by definition following the road to Christ. But it's not to say that all roads lead to heaven. That's not what I'm saying. Christ,
for sure.
Christ is.
I think I really like what you say about, if you're pursuing truth, you are eventually pursuing Christ. I mean, breadcrumbs, traces, like they're in different religions, different roads, and I mean they're all around, But eventually, Christ could claim by saying that he is the truth. And my conservative part of the brain, is already, I can understand it. I can understand how they would be careful with regards to these words and stuff. But like there is a place I think where we need to be more open-minded about these sort of concepts. As Paul, when he went to Athens and was preaching to the people there, he actually was referring to the people and relating to what they worshipped as the unknown God, and then he started explaining to them about the being, how in Christ we have our being, we move and live and have our being, and use that to the language that they understood, you know, to kind of help them to direct and them to who Christ is, and then talked about the resurrection, which was a very interesting method of evangelism. I think we could get into that sometime as well. But man, for the time being, I think we're gonna have to just cut it off right here. We always say this every time we have a chat, but there are so much things that we can talk about. Like that, we can have this conversation on for a long time. And I will definitely be coming back with you to discuss about other things, which I think will be helpful to have a better context and understanding about certain things, a better perspective about certain things that I guess, let's say, more conservative side of Christianity has sort of missed or failed to catch, sort of a deal, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I should just say, I also haven't figured all this stuff out, right? I'm not sitting here like, oh, this is where, you know, psychedelics fit in, and this is, I mean, I am as much as the next guy wrestling with these questions, you know, working through this stuff. And if we don't give ourselves the freedom to work through these things, we're never gonna work through them. Right. So these discussions need to happen, and there will be times where I'm like, oh yeah, actually I was probably maybe I was a little bit wrong about that, or it's just the nature of thinking.
Yeah,
that you,
sure thing.
You know, you figure things out. But there are certain things that, you know, at this point in my life, I don't think I'll ever, like I said earlier, you can't reason me back into atheism any more than you can reason me 2 feet taller. It just it's so beyond that point, right? It just gets to a place where, Anyway,
do you know that you grew 2 feet taller while we were doing the interview?
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I saw you.
You're very.
If you just watch the clip again, you know, from the beginning until now, like you can see your head growing up.
You must have reasoned me into it.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. All right, Dylan Gous, thank you very much. Make sure that you go and follow his YouTube channel, Existential Delight. And we'll be coming back to you with more interviews next time. God bless you guys.
Thanks, Jazzy. It was really nice to be here.